Hello students, welcome to Shorop's classes. So this is another lecture videos that we are going to record today. So we will be talking about international economics. So in this video we'll be talking about the assumptions of Heckscher Ohlin model. So we'll be talking about the assumptions of Heckscher Ohlin model. So first of all, we'll start with there are three assumptions in Heckscher Ohlin model. The first assumption that we'll be talking about, that is assumption 1. So first we'll talk about the first assumption. So in this first assumption, the first assumption of Heckscher Ohlin model is concave to origin. So it is concave to origin, production, possibility, frontier. So PPF, which is production, possibility, frontier, possibility, so it is production, possibility, frontier is what? It is concave to origin. It is concave to origin. So this is the first assumption of Heckscher Ohlin model, that is the production, possibility, frontier is concave to origin. So what is this basically talks about? When we consider two factors of production, we find that there is a possibility of substitution of land by labor or labor by land. So first of all, we need to know that is there are two countries. Okay, so country 1 and country B, and there are two goods. Say for an example, in this example we'll talk about clothes and food, and there are two factors of production, land and labor. So there are two factors of production. This is why it is also known as 2 by 2 by 2, that is two countries, two goods, two factors of production. So it is also known by 2 by 2 by 2, which eventually means two countries, and two commodities model. So here we also know for this reason that there are two factors, namely land and labor. So there are two factors, namely land and labor. So we know when we consider two factors of production, which are land and labor, we find that there is a possibility of substitution. We find that there is a possibility of substitution. So we find that there is a possibility of substitution of land by labor or labor by land, of land by labor or labor by land. So when we consider two factors, there is a possibility of substitution, land by labor or labor by land. Now we know in which case the production possibility frontier will be concave to the origin. So in this case the production possibility frontier, which is PPF, will be what? Will be concave to the origin. Now in order to understand this rationally, behind this, we have to define couple of expressions. So first of all, we need to define couple of expression. To be very specific, we need to define 6 expressions. So we need to define 6 expressions. So the first expression is given by, now for this allow me to change the color. So the first expression is given by ARC. The first expression is given by ARC, which means across of land used to produce 1 yard of cloth. So it is known as acres of land used to produce acres of land used to produce 1 yard of cloth. It is given by ARC. And what is ALC? ALC given as hours of labor used to produce 1 yard of cloth. This is acres of land and this is hours of labor used to produce 1 yard of cloth. So it is hours of labor used to produce 1 yard of cloth. Then the next term will be ATF, which is acres of land used to produce 1 ton of food. Acres of land used to produce and ALF is given as hours of labor used to produce 1 ton of food. And finally we have L, given by the economics endowment of labor, and we have capital T. It is given as economics endowment of land. It is endowment of labor, which is denoted by capital N, and endowment of land is denoted by T. So we have, as you can see, 6 things to remember from here. So the first one is ARC, which is acres of land required to produce 1 yard of cloth. ALC, that is 1 hour of labor required to produce 1 yard of cloth. Then it is ATF, that is acres of land used to produce 1 ton of food. Hours of labor needs to used to produce 1 ton of food. And finally L is the endowment of labor and T is the endowment of land. So from here we have these 6 options. So now here we speak of the quantity of land or labor used not to produce used to produce 1 yard of cloth or ton of food. The reason is that in a true factor model there is likely to be some scope for choosing an input mix. So we need to remember what in a 2 factors model there is likely to be some scope for choosing an input mix. So this was the first assumption, that the production possibility frontier is what it is. Concave to the origin. So now what I'll do is I'll simply write down the resource context in this. Resource contents are given, will be looking like ATF plus QC into ATC must be less than equals to T, and QF into ALF plus QC into ALC must be less than equals to L. So we have got it from what equation? We have found it from this, ATF, which is the acres of land to produce 1 ton of food, into the quantity of food that is produced. An acre of land, produced for what? Acres of land needed for production of 1 yard of cloth, which must be less than equals to the endowment of land, and here QF into ALF, which is what? The quantity of food, into the ALF, which is nothing but the hours of labor needed to produce 1 ton of food, and for production of cloth, the hours of labor to produce 1 yard of cloth, which must be less than equals to 10. This is known as resource endowment. This is known as what? 2 resource constraint. Now we will simply draw the assumption which says that the PPF will be concave, which looks like this. So here we know it happens because the PPF, there is this scope of factor substitution when there are 2 inputs. So its slope increases as economy moves from left to right. So as economy moves from left to right, as you can see, its slope eventually increases. So it has increasing opportunity cost. So as it moves from left to right. So I hope you guys have understood the first assumption, which says the production possibility curve is what? It is concave to the origin. And why does this takes place? Because of 2 factors. There is this possibility of factor substitution. Now we'll go to the second assumption, that is the role of commodity prices. Now we'll go to another assumption, which eventually talks of what? Which eventually talks of the role of commodity prices. So now we'll go to the assumption 2. So in assumption 2, it is given the role of commodity prices. So the second assumption is So now we'll be talking about the role of commodity prices. So what is the role of commodity prices? Now where exactly on PPF will the economy produce depends on price. So where on the PPF economy produce depends on prices. Depend on prices. To be more specific, the economy produces at a point which maximizing the value of output. So for this we have to draw another diagram. First of all, I need to write down the total value of economy's output. So the total value of economy's output will be equals to V equals to PC into QC plus PF into QF. So this is the total value of economy's output. Now we know where PC and PF are prices of clothes and food. This is the prices of clothes and this is the prices of food. Now respectively on the ISO value line. So we have to draw an ISO value line. Concave PPF. Now we know there are many ISO value line. So there are many ISO values line. Say for an example, there is one here which is denoted by IV1. Say there is another here which is denoted by IV2. Say there is another here which is tangent to this point, which is known as say M, and there is another point, this I will write as IB3, and there is another which lies beyond this PPF which we will name as IB4. So we have this 4 IV line. We know the slope of this is what? This is the slope which is equals to minus PC by PF. This is the slope which is written as minus PC by PF. This is PPF, QC, and there is QF, and there is origin 0. So for here we know that is there are ISO value lines such as IV1, IV2, IV3, IV4. Okay, so now this ISO value line, the value of output is constant. On this ISO value line, the value of output is what? The value of output is constant. So on this ISO value line, the value of output is constant. Now such a line is locus of point showing alternative combination of QF and QC which yield the same total value of economy. So these are the alternative combinations of QF and QC which yield same total value of the economy, which yield same total value of the economy. And we know it has constant slope which is given as PC by PF. So it has constant slope which is given as PC by PF. Now we know the economy produces at point M where economy produces as point M, where the PPF touches the highest attainable IC value line, which is IV3. So where PPF touches the highest attainable ISO value line, which is IV3, at this point the slope of PPF is equal to the slope of ISO value line, which is PC by PF. Now this means the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of cloth is equal to the relative price of cloth. So at this point what happens is that the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of cloth is equals to the relative price of cloth, is equals to relative price of cloth at this point. So this is the assumption 2, that is the role of commodity price. So we get role of commodity price as this. So we get the slope as PC by PF. So where the relative price of cloth is equals to the opportunity cost of cloth, we get the equilibrium, which is at point M. Now we'll talk about another assumption and the last assumption, so which is assumption 3. So assumption 3 basically talk about the role of factor prices in input choices. So it talks about the role of factor prices in input choices. So it talks about the role of factor prices . Assumption 3 talks about the role of factor prices So assumption 3 talked about the role of factor prices in input choices. So for this we know the choice of input mix. So we know the choice of input mix depends on relative prices of input. So choice of input mix depends on choice of input mix depends on relative prices of input, and if hourly wage rate is high, the land rent is low, producer will use more land and less labor. The converse is also true. So the how input mix depends on relative price we know when hourly wage rate is high, and the land rent is low, and when land rent is low, it is quite evident from this, it is quite evident that what happens is that the producer will use more land and less labor. Producer will use more land and less labor. So here the producer will use more land and less labor. So now we also know the converse is also true. Now if the hourly wage rate is W, if the hourly wage rate is given as W, and if the R is given as the cost of 1 acre of land or rental rate, or the rental rate, that is the cost rate of land, is given as small r, then the choice of inputs will depend on the factor price ratio W by R. So then the choice of input will depend on what? Will depend on the relative factor price ratio, which is W by R. It will depend on W by R. So now we know the relationship between factor prices and factor proportion, which is TL, is the ratio, that is the ratio of land to labor in the production is shown in the diagram that we are going to draw now. So now we are going to draw a diagram to show you this relation. So in this diagram, allow me to rub this off. So in this diagram what happens is that there is CC line given, just let me redraw it. We'll take T by L, which is ratio of land to labor on the horizontal axis. We'll take ratio of land to labor on the horizontal axis, and we'll take W by R, which is the factor price ratio, W by R, which is factor price ratio on the vertical axis. Now we know, as per this we have found to be W by R naught, and here we have found T by L for cloth production and T by L for food production, and this is the FF for food and this is for cloth. And at this point we know there is high land to labor ratio, there is high land to labor ratio, and here there is low land to labor ratio. So from here we know that the corresponding relationship between W by R and T by L, which is ratio of land to labor, is what in cloth production is shown in this by the curve is CC, and the line FF lies to the left of the line CC, as you can see. So indicated that for any factor price ratio W by R naught, the land labor ratio will be higher in production of food. Land labor ratio will be higher in production of food than in production of capital. This means the production of food is land intensive and production of cloth is land labor intensive. So production of cloth is what? The production of cloth is labor intensive and production of food is land intensive. So what did we learn here? We learned that there are three assumptions. So the first assumption basically talked about, that is the production possibility functor, that is concave to origin. Why it is concave to origin? Because due to the presence of two factor substitution and increasing opportunity cost, we get the PPF to be concave to origin. This is the first assumption. The second assumption was commodity prices, which is the slope of PPF is tangential to the slope of IV, which is the value curve. So value curve of total output is constant. We have found the slope at the point M where IV is tangent to the PPF. It is PC by PF, which is nothing but relative price of cloth. We know there are alternative combination of QF and QC we get, which gives the same total value of the economy. It talks about the ISO value line, and opportunity cost is what? 1 unit of cloth must be equals to relative price of cloth. So at this point, the opportunity cost of 1 unit of cloth production is equals to the relative price of cloth. And the third option talks about the input prices depends on the role of factor prices. So which looks like this. So there are four things that we need to remember. The first one is it depends on relative prices of the commodity. Then it depends on the relative factors prices of the commodity. And the first one was it was concave to origin. So in today's video, we'll talk about three assumptions of Heckscher Ohlin model. So I hope you guys have understood it. If you still have any query or doubt, you can simply WhatsApp me on this number, which is 9836793076, or you can also go to our website, which is www.showropsearchclasses.com. There you will find a lot of other videos like this, and you will also get to see a lot of other materials which are needed for different entrance exam. So thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day ahead.